Welcome back, everyone. Today we're going to dive into commercial real estate.
Yeah.
Specifically, how our brains, can sometimes trip us up when we're trying to figure out how much a property is really worth.
You'd be surprised how often, a few thousand or even $1 million can really change how we see a place's value.
Right, and we've got a ton of research here about all these cognitive biases and logical fallacies that can totally cloud our judgment.
Mm.
So we'll unpack those, and more importantly, we'll give you some tools to avoid those pitfalls yourself.
Because, whether someone's buying, selling, or just trying to understand what's going on in the market, knowing these mental traps can be huge.
Totally. It's the difference between a smart decision and a costly mistake.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's start with this term, cognitive biases. It sounds kind of, technical. What does it actually mean when we're talking about real estate?
So think of it this way. Our brains are always looking for shortcuts, right? Ways to simplify this crazy, complex world.
Right.
And these shortcuts, these biases, they're usually helpful in our everyday life. But when we're dealing with something as complex as, like, valuing a property, they can really lead us down the wrong path.
So it's like our brains are trying to be efficient, but sometimes they oversimplify things to the point where it's just not accurate.
Exactly. And that's where the problems start.
Okay, got it.
Let's take confirmation bias, for example.
Yeah.
Imagine you're totally convinced that a neighborhood is about to boom. You're going to be more likely to, seek out information that backs that up while ignoring anything that says otherwise.
Yeah. Ooh, I see how that could be dangerous. You're basically cherry-picking data to fit what you already believe, right?
Precisely. And that can lead to, way overpaying for a property or, investing in an area that's not actually as promising as you thought.
Okay, so how do we avoid falling into that trap?
Well, it's tough, but awareness is the first step.
Okay.
Once you know about confirmation bias, you can actually try to find information that challenges your assumptions.
So it's like being your own devil's advocate, right? Like forcing yourself to poke holes in your own logic.
Exactly. Now, let's say you've managed to avoid confirmation bias. You've done your homework, you're looking at comparable properties, and that's where this thing called anchoring bias can really get you.
Anchoring bias. Okay, what's that one all about?
This one's all about first impressions. The first piece of information we get, like a seller's asking price, that can become an anchor, right? It can really influence how we see the value.
So if the first house I look at is listed at a crazy high price, everything else I see after that might seem like a bargain, even if it's still overpriced.
That's exactly how anchoring bias works.
Yeah.
It's why it's so important to do your research, to really understand what the market value is in an area. Don't just rely on one listing.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So we've got confirmation bias, anchoring bias. What other mental traps do we need to watch out for in real estate?
Well, there's one that's particularly tempting for investors. Overconfidence bias.
Overconfidence. Oh, I can see how that could be a problem.
It's that belief that we're, way better at predicting the future than we actually are.
Right.
Overconfident investors, they might overestimate their ability to time the market perfectly. And that leads them to make these risky bets that just don't pan out.
So, they jump into a hot market thinking they can buy low and sell high, but they misjudge the timing and end up losing big.
Precisely. And, overconfidence bias, it can be fueled by past successes, which is why it's so important to stay grounded. Remember that every deal, every market cycle, it's different.
Don't let your past wins, cloud your judgment for the next one.
Exactly. And speaking of market cycles, there's another bias that can really distort how we see value, especially in real estate.
Okay, what's that?
Recency bias.
Recency bias. Does that have something to do with, remembering recent events more vividly?
It does. It means we tend to put too much emphasis on recent trends when we're making decisions. So if the market's been, going crazy lately, we might just assume that's going to last forever, even if history tells us otherwise.
It's like that saying, past performance is not indicative of future results, but applied to real estate.
That's a great way to put it. Just because prices have been going up, up, up.
Doesn't mean they're going to keep going up.
Exactly.
Right.
Recency bias can lead to buying at the top of the market, which is a painful mistake.
So we've got to be careful not to get caught up in the hype, right?
Yeah.
Remember that these markets, they go in cycles.
Yes.
What goes up must come down eventually.
Exactly. And when it comes to avoiding these biases, just being aware of them, that's only half the battle. We need to arm ourselves with the right tools and strategies to actually combat them.
Yeah, give us the cheat codes to outsmart our own brains.
Well, one of the most powerful tools is data.
Okay.
By grounding our decisions in solid data, objective analysis, we can really minimize how much our own biases affect us.
Okay, so data-driven decisions. But data can be so overwhelming, especially in real estate. There are so many factors to consider. Where do we even start?
That's where a little technology can really come in handy. There are some amazing tools and platforms out there now that can take huge amounts of real estate data and make it actually understandable and useful.
So instead of us trying to go through like mountains of spreadsheets,
Right.
we can use tech to help us see trends, see patterns, and maybe red flags that we might miss because of our own biases.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But even with the best data and technology in the world, it's important to remember numbers tell a story.
Okay.
And sometimes we need a diverse group of storytellers to really grasp the full narrative.
Diverse storytellers. Okay, now you've got me interested. What do you mean by that?
Well, I mean, when you're trying to make these decisions, surrounding yourself with people who challenge how you think and see things differently, that can be huge.
Yeah.
Like imagine a commercial property.
Okay.
You might have an appraiser who's like a genius with the numbers,
Right.
but they've also got to factor in things like market trends, local rules, even things like, who lives in the neighborhood and what might be built there in the future.
So it's about connecting those hard numbers to like the bigger picture, like really understanding the why behind the what.
Exactly. Bringing in people from different fields, urban planners, people who study the market, even environmental consultants can give you super valuable insights, things you might completely miss otherwise.
Right, because they each have their own puzzle piece.
Exactly.
And you need all those pieces to get the full picture.
Yes.
So like if I'm buying a house, I shouldn't just rely on what my realtor says.
Exactly. Talk to contractors about what it might take to fix things up, any potential problems with the structure, chat with the neighbors, see what they say about the community, the schools, all that. Do your own research on crime, property taxes, if there are plans to build new stuff nearby. The more info you can get from different sources, the better decisions you can make.
It's like building this multi-layered defense system against those biases,
Oh.
right? We've got data, different perspectives. Anything else we can add to our arsenal?
Oh, absolutely. Never underestimate the power of just constantly learning.
Okay.
The more we understand these biases and fallacies,
Yeah.
the better we are at spotting them, in ourselves and even in others.
Right.
And it's not just about memorizing definitions and stuff. It's about really developing this critical thinking mindset, always questioning things and looking for evidence to back up claims.
So it's less about being like psychology experts
Yeah.
and more about being more aware of how we think and how our thinking could be leading us astray.
Exactly. Like, imagine you're at one of those real estate seminars
Okay.
and the speaker, this really charismatic developer, is pitching this amazing opportunity. Like, you can't miss out on this. The whole room is buzzing. Everyone's ready to invest.
Oh, I can totally picture it. The energy is electric. The FOMO is real.
And that's exactly when you need to be careful. If you're aware of this thing called the appeal to authority fallacy, you're less likely to get swept up in all that.
Okay, appeal to authority. What is that?
It basically tricks us into believing something just because someone important or influential says it's true.
Oh, right, right. Like just because a celebrity with a real estate portfolio says this neighborhood is about to take off doesn't mean it's true.
Exactly. So instead of blindly following the crowd, you start asking questions. Like, what's this developer's track record? What are other reports saying about the area? Are there any red flags no one is talking about?
So you're taking a step back from the hype and really looking at it objectively, even if it means being the only one not jumping in.
Exactly. And this critical thinking mindset, it's not something that happens overnight. It's a lifelong process of learning and, checking yourself. There's tons of resources out there, books, courses online, even podcasts like this one. The important thing is to find what works for you, what fits into your life.
It's about making learning part of your routine, even just for a few minutes a day.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And don't underestimate the value of just getting out there and doing it.
Yeah.
Every property you look at, every negotiation,
Yeah.
it's a chance to sharpen those critical thinking skills.
Learning from the trenches, as they say.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Real estate gives you endless opportunities to test your assumptions, see what works, what doesn't.
Right. So we're going to make mistakes.
Oh, yeah. We're human. Right.
Right.
We're going to make mistakes.
So what do we do when those inevitable mistakes happen?
That's where resilience comes in and a growth mindset. It's about seeing setbacks not as failures, but as opportunities to learn and improve.
Yeah. So instead of like dwelling on what went wrong,
Right.
we got to analyze it, see where we messed up, And then adjust our strategy right away.
Precisely. And this is where those different viewpoints we were talking about, they could be so helpful. Like getting feedback from people you trust, mentors, advisors, even your peers can reveal your blind spots.
Yeah, it's like having a support system to help you through those rough patches.
Absolutely.
Right.
Real estate, it can be a wild ride.
Hmm.
Ups and downs, the whole thing. Having those trusted advisors around you, it can make all the difference.
Sometimes it's about knowing when to walk away from a deal too, right?
Right.
Even if it means admitting you were wrong.
Absolutely. You got to recognize when something isn't working anymore, when a deal doesn't fit with your goals or your risk tolerance. It's about having the discipline to say, okay, got to cut my losses and move on to something better.
Yeah, yeah. It's not just about being smart. It's about being brave enough to make those tough calls when you need to.
Exactly. In real estate, like in life, courage and wisdom, they kind of go hand in hand.
They do. They do. So as we wrap up this whole deep dive into real estate and these cognitive biases that can really mess with our decisions, what's the one big thing you want our listeners to remember?
Well, becoming aware of these biases is already a huge step. But I think the biggest takeaway here is understanding these psychological factors that affect our choices. It helps us become more conscious, more responsible, and in the end, just way more successful in the real estate world.
I love that. Just more aware, more mindful of the forces at play, both internal and external.
Exactly.
Okay, so recognizing our own limitations, seeking out those diverse perspectives we talked about, and never stop learning.
Yes.
Those are key for making good decisions in any field, really, but especially in something as complex as real estate. But it goes beyond just us as individuals, right?
That's a really important point. We've been focusing on how these biases affect us personally, but now,
Yeah.
what about the whole system? How do these thought patterns, these unconscious biases, how do they show up in the real estate industry itself?
Right, like on a bigger level.
Exactly. It's crucial to remember that these biases don't exist in isolation. They're shaped by our culture, by history, even by how the industry operates.
Like a feedback loop, right?
Yeah.
Like biased thinking leads to these biased systems, which then just create more bias.
Exactly. For instance, let's say there's this widespread belief that certain neighborhoods just aren't as desirable, maybe because of who lives there or their proximity to industrial areas.
Right.
Those biases, they can start to show up in how properties are appraised, even in lending practices.
And that can have a real impact on property values, access to credit.
Absolutely. It creates this cycle where certain communities are constantly undervalued, putting them at a disadvantage, which then just reinforces those initial biases.
Wow. It's a lot more complex than it seems on the surface.
It is. It's a tough problem, no easy solutions. But, like we've been saying, awareness is that crucial first step.
Awareness and that willingness to question those deeply held assumptions we all have. Like, why do we value certain types of properties or certain neighborhoods over others?
Exactly. Asking the hard questions, being open to challenging what we think we know, and pushing for more fair and inclusive practices across the industry.
So well said. As we wrap up this deep dive into the world of real estate, with all its complexities and honestly, sometimes it's head-scratching moments,
Right.
is there one final thought, one pearl of wisdom you want to leave our listeners with?
I think the most important thing to remember is this. Real estate, it's about more than just buildings and profits and market trends. It's about people. And when we understand the psychology behind our decisions, both individually and as a whole, that's when we can start creating a more just, a more equitable, and a more prosperous environment for everyone.
That's such a powerful message to end on. Real estate is ultimately about creating spaces where people can thrive.
Right.
And by being aware of our own biases, we can make choices that benefit not just ourselves, but the communities around us.
Exactly. Because at the end of the day, we all rise together.
Perfectly said. And on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive into the world of real estate and those sneaky cognitive biases. We covered a lot, from confirmation bias to anchoring bias, the importance of using data, getting different viewpoints, and just always being open to learning.
And this is just the beginning, right?
It is.
Keep those critical thinking skills sharp. Stay curious,
Yeah.
and don't be afraid to question everything.
Who knows? You might just find some hidden real estate gems out there and maybe learn a little something about yourself along the way. Until next time, happy investing, everyone.